So, all right, this is a topic that definitely spans a lot of worlds and definitely calls out certain aspects of certain worlds. So, if you are an occultist, magic maker, a witch, or anybody working with spirits, if you're not working with the land spirits of where you are, um, you're not doing shit. You're not doing shit in terms of magic, in terms of spirits, in terms of any kind of spiritual work. If you're not dealing with the living beings that are all around you in terms of the natural world, um, all that knowledge, all that symbolism, all those spirits, big, mighty angels and demons, and all these things, it's not having any real effect on the world around you. So if you're not concretely, tactily, practically, physically interacting with the land that you are currently on in some way, you're not doing shit. Okay? Um, Also, if you are working with the land, ecology, healing of any kind in terms of ecological or environmental stuff, if you're not dealing with the spiritual aspect of that work that you're doing, if you're not acknowledging that there's a being, there are forces bigger than you that are sentient, cognizant, willful beings, if you're not acknowledging the spirit and the soul of what you're working with in the soil and the trees and the atmosphere and the waterways, if you're not regarding those very elements themselves as spiritual beings, as beings that have a soul and a spirit and a consciousness and an awareness and a shadow and a direction of their own and things that they're navigating and a personality and moods and all these things that come with being a soul living in a spirit, a mind, and a body, right? If we are not acknowledging this soul and spirit in the natural world, you're also not doing shit. You're not doing shit as an environmentalist, as a anything. Anything working to heal the climate, heal the atmosphere, heal the oceans. It's time for us to recognize that the earth is a living being. And beings, collection of beings, that there are worlds within worlds. Just as I am a being, I also have smaller beings living within me, right? There's a whole microbiome in my gut and my digestive system. I'm in contact with all the microbials in the air. Every time I breathe in, I'm interacting with living beings, little tiny life forms, and they're interacting with me. Right? And so in the same way that I'm not conscious of the microbiome and it's not really conscious of me, we share different scales and scopes of awareness, but we are affecting each other at all times. If I do something, if I eat something different, they're going to be affected. If I go into a different environment and experience changes in my overall body, those bacteria and microorganisms are going to experience the same an effect in their environment. Now if they start behaving differently and start doing, if I get different tribes of bacteria coming through, I'm going to experience a shift in my overall state of being. So we're interconnected. We are affecting each other. There's no there doesn't have to be a conscious conversation for us to be having this interaction that's constant all the time. And it's the same with the planet and with us. It's the same with ecosystems and the planet, right? Just like we have different organs in the body, we have different sections of our bodies that have different ways of circulating fluid and different structures and different environments. That's the same with the planet and the solar system as a whole. The planet has, different oceans, different river systems, different earth formations, in terms of the mineral structures of the planet. All of these things are different aspects within an overall being that we are within. We are living inside the body of a being. And she's aware of what she's aware of. She's navigating her own set of territory, and she's having interactions with beings much larger than her. All of these are interconnected. And to regard the natural world as if it's not a sentient being and not part of a system of sentience, co-sentience, a co-creation of a body, that's very limited in terms of the amount of effect that you can have with the elements themselves. And likewise, if you are only regarding the spiritual world, but you're not locating that in the very physical day-to-day reality that you wake up in the body of the earth. Every morning you wake up, you become conscious within this being, and you go about and have this interaction. If you're not locating these kind of like grand concepts of angels and the underworld and shadows and light beings and light codes and DNA, it's like all of these things, or on the other end of it, right? All of these big, powerful, scary demons that have all this power. If you're not locating these things like in the actual experience of you waking up, if you're not seeing the magic, if you're not seeing the spirits in the tree outside your window when you wake up, if you're not able to apply that spiritual work and the magic work, if it's not touching the beings closest to you, it's also very limiting in terms of what you're able to actually do. So it's time that we recognize the interplay of these things. I think there's lots of reasons why we're separated, right? Why we have scientists who are only focusing on what they can objectively observe in the material realm. And they're constantly bumping up against that boundary of like, oh my God, there's all this stuff that we can't see, we can't measure. There's all these forces that are creating effects that we can't measure. And they're always trying to sort of fine tune those measurements to try to be able to measure it, instead of just recognizing that you're speaking to a being. So why don't you act like it? Right? And if it's like, for, on the other hand, occultists, like, there's many reasons why these traditions have been brought up into the mind and out of the body, right? And just like the scientists are hyper fixated on the material, Occultists are hyper fixated on the spiritual and the mental and that which does not physically exist. The point is to see how these are correlated. That is the point of any kind of body of knowledge or science or cosmology or work with the world. What is the point other than to see how the non-physical realms of our thoughts, our imagination, our minds, our spirits, to see how that is related to the physical world? And then to look at the physical world around us and be able to see the more than physical within that. To me, it's obvious that that's the point of any of these studies, is to come back to this equilibrium point, right? Of where are these connected? Finding the equilibrium, like studying the material deeply in order to get to know the being behind it. Who expressed these patterns? Who created these, lights in the sky that we see? Who's behind that? Who's the being that existed or is existing now that is expressing these forms? Right? Who, when we look at plants or fungus or crystals or things that people study here on Earth, what's the point of studying all the intricacies and details of how these things function if it's not to get to know the being behind this creation? If you're going to learn the language of, mushrooms, or you're going to learn the language of the stars, or you're going to learn the language of weather or oceans, or wouldn't it be to speak to the ocean? Wouldn't it be to speak to the mushrooms or the crystal kingdom or right? I don't understand why you would study a language if you weren't going to speak with the people who speak it, right? The beings who speak it. So that's that's the question or the call out or the challenge, right? To the sort of materially fixated scientific community is, what is the point of studying the language of the natural world if you're not going to actually speak to the natural world? Regard it as something that is speaking to you, and regard it with, acknowledge the fact that there is not something you can measure, but that you're literally in a interaction back and forth, a communication through these expressions that are the elements, that are the weather patterns, that are the planetary movements. Right? And then, my call out, my question to the spiritual masters and gurus and these, people who, even not just living, but these traditions that have been around for a long time that are all about understanding the mind and understanding and connecting directly with these spirits, and kind of freeing oneself from the prison of the body or this material density. Right, there's lots of places we see that spiritually fixated or anti-materialism in spiritual, religious, different hermetic traditions, different philosophic traditions, different and now we see this in like a lot of new age ascension and escaping the matrix, and all of this anti-material spirituality. Like, my call out or question or challenge to that is, what's the point? What is the point of communicating with spirits if they don't have an effect on you, or they don't carry an impact with the things around you? What's the point of learning to speak the language of spirits, of learning to hear beyond physical sound, of learning to see beyond the veil, so to speak, or beyond the physical reality. What is the point of learning that language of the spirit, of the mind, if it isn't to see and communicate with the mind of the planet, with the mind of the trees, with the mind of the water? What is the point? There's two divorced, separated, fragmented polarities, right, or dualities here that have been separated from each other, right? There's a real conflict between the spiritual and the scientific, or the material, and all that is beyond the material. I just don't get what's the point if you're not speaking to be heard, right? If you're not hearing to actually listen to what is being said. It's very, I don't get it. So just putting that out there.